Hey guys, welcome back to Staying Strong for Marriages, a YouTube channel dedicated to helping people go through marriage, separation, or divorce using Christian principles. What I'm basically going to do is look at this book today as a follow-up because I didn't feel like it was fair just to have, one book and call it good. I want to get, two or three or four different looks at this thing about this Erasmus guy. So today what I'm going to be looking at is a paper by G.J. Wenham. It's called Matthew and Divorce, an Old Crux Revisited. And the other thing that I think is really important, you'll notice that if you read Luke's and Mark's account of what Jesus said about divorce, no exception clause like the one that you find in Matthew 19. And so this is really strange because how can you have, this big of a disagreement? Some verses saying that there's no way to remarry post-divorce without getting yourself into adultery, and another passage that says that's true except, well, I mean, that's quite problematic. I think we would all agree with that. And so why I chose this paper is because this looks a lot at that aspect. Again, Matthew and Divorce, an Old Crucifix Revisited by G.J. Wenham. So basically, he says right in the beginning, my purpose is to review the main exegetical options that have been advocated recently and then suggest a new approach to understanding the acceptive clause. They're talking about Matthew 19:9. Essentially, he's going to be looking at something called a modified patristic view that he thinks avoids the problem inherent with some of the other views that he looks at. And one of the things that he does really focus on is the Erasmus or Erasmian view, kind of put forth by Desiderius Erasmus in the 1500s. Anyway, so one of the things he just says is like, look, the problem is that we have this issue with Matthew 19:9 because it doesn't really line up with the restrictions in 1 Corinthians 7 or Romans 7 that both say that once a person divorces that they're not able to go and remarry someone new. So this is what they look at. They also notice that you kind of have the same thing showing up in Luke's gospel as well as in Mark's gospel. And so they basically say, look, this begs the question, what's the deal? How are we going to understand this? And they even say that, some people have really said this is just frustrating. This is annoying. What's Matthew's deal? So he says one of the cool things about Matthew 19 or the Matthew Gospels, one, that it rules out polygamy, two, that it puts men and women on equal footing, that both are required to be sexually loyal exclusively to each other, and it also denies that just giving a piece of paper or a bill of divorce, it denies that giving a person a bill of divorce means that I can now go out and remarry whoever I want. So that was their main points. Again, they say a divorcee was not free to remarry. For that would be to commit adultery. It lines up with Luke, it lines up with Mark, it lines up with Paul. And so again, we're coming back. What are we going to do? Well, it says that the Matthew 19 passage creates its own problems. Basically, how would the evangelist Matthew himself have felt free to modify Jesus' teaching so drastically? I mean, how can you have this new exception clause that fundamentally changes everything? And it says, more importantly, it creates great difficulty on the second level. That is Matthew's view of divorce as opposed to Jesus' original teaching. Matthew has so modified Jesus' teaching as to make nonsense of it, at least if we take 19:9 to allow divorce and remarriage for unchastity. So, again, just highlighting the major point of why write this paper at all, why talk about this, and why is there such controversy? Well, it's because Matthew 19:9 doesn't really line up with some of these other verses. So, it says redaction criticism. It highlights the problem of understanding Matthew 19:9 on an Erasmian sense. What's redaction criticism? Well, it tells us. It says focusing on the evangelist's editorial methods. Redaction critics have become very sensitive to the relationship between different units of a tradition. They insist that sayings of Jesus cannot be interpreted in isolation from each other, as earlier form critics tended to suppose, but that the evangelist is linked together
sayings deliberately to shed light on them. So then they go into this big bit about how like Matthew tends to say things repeatedly, and he also has this habit of kind of abbreviating things that have been said multiple times already. He just kind of shortens it. And so anyway, they talk about essentially, if you look further on in the Matthew 19 passage, that there's this bit where Jesus then meets with the disciples, and the disciples then question him on this whole marriage and divorce bit. Um, and he talks about how some are made to be eunuchs for the sake of the kingdom. Well, they're saying in this, basically in this article, that if we take Jesus to be referring to divorcees who are not allowed to remarry as eunuchs, Jesus says that he who is able to receive this, let him receive it. And so they make the point in this article that um, makes a strong challenge to anyone who would conclude, um, well, it has a lot to say as far as what should we take away from this whole discussion on marriage, divorce, and then remarriage. And we kind of see Jesus saying that some are to be eunuchs, and so that's something to be noted. Anyway, they go on to say, finally, it's very difficult to see the connection of Matthew 19 verses 9 and 10 on the Erasmian level when you look at the rest of the chapter. Um, Basically, they go on to say, well, why did the disciples seem so shocked? Or they basically say that the disciples did seem very shocked, very, very shocked. And how does it make sense that they would have such a reaction if Jesus was just saying something that was already said all the time by other people, namely the Shamite group? The Shamites were a group of Pharisees who basically said that, look, there are certain um, sexual sins that can break up a marriage, and so their point that they basically make here is like, if we're going to land on the position that sexual sin can lead to divorce and free a person to remarry, then how do we explain this whole reaction from the disciples being so shocked, as they quite clearly were? And they were quite clearly still talking about divorce and remarriage. Anyways, so they say one thing would be that the no remarriage interpretation would avoid the problems that are brought up here. They look at a couple different other possibilities, one being that perhaps Matthew's accepted clause was talking to Gentile converts who were in incestuous marriages, and so he was basically talking to them about why they should leave those marriages because they would be null, and that was a use of the word porneia found in 1 Corinthians uh, as well as in Matthew 19. So 1 Corinthians 5 is the section where you will find porneia being translated as incest. Anyway, the problem that they have with that is that porneia has a very wide scope as far as the sexual offenses that it can refer to. So they don't really like that view because they say it's just a stretch to narrow it all the way down just to this one aspect of sexual sin called incest. They just don't. They think that's trouble. So the other thing that they say is, here's a possible other solution. It says, undoubtedly, the slickest way of dealing with the acceptive clause is the so-called preteritive view, advocated by a long line of authors. It basically says that, Matthew just said this exception as an aside, so it would read like this: whoever divorces his wife, unchastity is irrelevant, and marries another commits adultery. They say that's a reasonable reading or way to interpret the verse. It coincides it along with reconciles it along with these other verses we're looking at, and so it kind of solves the problem for us. And they say that this makes excellent sense in the context. Now, the preteritative position that they just talked about, this, that it was an aside, that unchastity is irrelevant, doesn't work grammatically. There was this gentleman, apparently DuPont, who has done a lot of work, and basically what he says is that it just doesn't, it's too much of a stretch. So where they kind of arrive then at this point in the article is they say all the views so far outlined have their problems. The Erasmian view clashes with its context. The rabbinic incest and betrothal interpretations give an unusually restricted sense to the word porneia, while the preteritive view forces Greek grammar. So they say, man, we have kind of issues with all these solutions. So what else is possible? So they say that the patristic view that allows separation but not remarriage for porneia escapes all of these problems. They go on, they talk about something then called the modified patristic view. And so you can see it here on the screen, but basically the Erasmian view would be divorce and remarriage is adultery, unless of course there's some form of unchastity that happened. If there's unchastity, then you can go ahead and divorce and you can go ahead and remarry. That's the Erasmian view, and that was the same view that was held by the Shamites that lived during Jesus' time. So that's kind of an old view. The other option is the modified patristic view. It's B. Here you can see on the screen B1. It says that divorce is actually sinful. It's actually divorce in and of itself is adulterous unless there happens to be some unchastity within the relationship. And the second point to this view is that you can never remarry. That remarriage is always adultery. And so that's the modified patristic view. So they go on and they talk a lot about some of the work that's been done on this. They switch over and they look at Matthew 5:32a, which is quite interesting and something that I did not realize. There's some pieces to this that I had never seen before. Basically says that on one hand, if one person in the marriage is unchaste or living in adultery, then if their partner was to divorce them, then obviously that's not the reason why they became an adulterer. Is because they decided to sleep around. Matthew 5:32 is thus a new idea. The divorce by itself is also adultery unless it be for unchastity. So this is really interesting. Yeah, they basically go on to look at it a little bit further, and they say that Matthew, in some senses, is more strict than the other Gospels in the sense that divorce in and of itself can be sinful even without remarriage, that it's not allowed in circumstances other than the presence of unchastity. So they say that the thing that they really like about this view is that it lines up as far as grammatical structure and semantic context of Matthew 19:9 when it's looked at from this one viewpoint, which is the following. One, that divorce followed by remarriage is always adulterous. This is the point made by all the synoptic Gospels. And two, that divorce by itself, except for unchastity, is also adulterous. So the other thing that they like about this is that this interpretation absolves Matthew from seeming like such an idiot. my words, not theirs, but it says, furthermore, this interpretation absolves the evangelist Matthew from the charge of poor editorial work and toning down the unpalatable teaching of Jesus. If anything, he might be regarded as more severe than the other synoptists, for only he preserves the idea that divorce by itself may be adulterous. The Erasmian interpretation of verse 9 clashes with its immediate context. The rabbinic and betrothal views demand an unnaturally narrow meaning for the word porneia, while the preteritive view is syntactically difficult. However, the modified patristic view advocated here avoids these problems. So if Matthew 19:9 is seen as affirming that any remarriage after divorce is adultery, and that divorce alone, except for unchastity, is also adulterous, the saying makes good sense in the context and avoids charging the evangelist with lexical and grammatical impropriety. From a pastoral point of view, it is probably the hardest position for our age to accept. We may well exclaim with the disciples, if that is the case, it's better not to marry. But that is another problem. Our purpose has been to understand the mind of Matthew more clearly, and behind that, the teachings of our Lord. Okay, you guys, if you want to hang tight, you will. I'll just go ahead and read the whole article out loud if you want to listen to that while you drive or cook or whatever. One thing I wanted to say I think is really important is there's that verse that says knowledge puffs up, but love builds up. The point of these things, and I think the danger of them, is to say, well, I'm right, and so, whatever. That's not the point, and we need to be careful of that. I think really the point isn't to do anything but be strengthened and encouraged towards love of God, towards love of yourself and your really your own righteousness, your own conduct, your own morals, your own ability to line up with what God wants, and really to leave that door open for really restoring your marriage. And perhaps, if this verse and if this article is right, really saving your spouse from entering into adultery. So very, very controversial, as you can well imagine. But thanks for tuning in. Love you guys. We'll talk to you next time. Bye.